I didn't used to be the kind of man who got scared walking alone at night. Most of my adult life was spent in the wilderness, tracking predators with a camera and a notebook instead of a gun. I used to think that if you respected nature, it respected you back. That belief carried me through a lot of close calls. Snakes, bears, broken bones, storms, but nothing shook it like the mountain lion attack the winter before. It wasn't a full attack, not technically. The lion didn't jump me or tear me apart, it stalked me. For almost 40 minutes, it followed me through the pines in Colorado, staying just out of sight. I didn't know it was there until I turned and saw its face low in the brush, eyes fixed on my throat. I yelled, raised my arms, did all the things you're supposed to do. It held its ground. When it finally slipped away, something in me stayed frozen. I hadn't been touched physically, but something inside me had been clawed open. The nightmares were constant after that. And by October 2019, my doctor told me I needed time away from work. My cousin, Mark, offered his lake cabin in Stillwater, Minnesota. Quiet place. Good people. Miles of trails and soft breezes off the water. It sounded like the perfect place to sew myself back together. For the first week or so, it helped. I took long walks along Stillwater Trail Road each evening, breathing in damp earth and pine needles, and the kind of silence you only get when the nearest city is far enough away to forget your name. But every night, as soon as the sun dipped behind the lake, I felt the same old twitch under my skin, the sense of being watched. My therapist said it was trauma, rewiring my nerves. I believed her. Mostly. Then came that Thursday night. I had left the cabin around 9 to grab groceries from the little shop in the village. It was raining harder than usual for October, cold enough that my breath fogged. The walk back should have been peaceful, but the darkness on Stillwater Trail Road was thicker than usual, like the trees were leaning in. There were no streetlights, just the faint glow of cabin windows across the lake. The rain softened the world into a dull hiss. I remember adjusting the grocery bag on my arm and telling myself, it's just the trauma talking, keep walking. But a few minutes into the trail, I felt the prickle at the base of my neck. The same one I felt the night the mountain lion followed me through the snow. I slowed my pace. The feeling grew sharper. When I stopped, I heard it, a heavy footstep somewhere behind me. Not the shuffle of a deer, not the small thud of a raccoon. This was heavier, human-like. I turned, trying not to show fear, but the path behind me was swallowed by the rain. "Hello," I called out. Nothing. I kept walking, faster this time, but the footsteps matched me, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. Every time I looked back, I saw only darkness and dripping branches. Halfway home, lightning cracked across the lake and lit up the woods for a split second. That was when I saw him. A tall figure stood between the birch trees, motionless, soaking wet. His head was tilted to the side in that strange, animal way, like he was studying me but didn't quite understand how to mimic a normal human posture. I froze. The darkness swallowed him again. "Hey," I yelled, forcing authority into my voice. "If you need help, I can call someone." Another flash. The figure was closer, maybe 30 feet away now. Same tilt of the head, same silence. My pulse slammed in my ears. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I believed in predators. 2 legs or 4 didn't matter. I sped up, practically jogging. The footsteps behind me grew louder, more deliberate, splashing in the mud. I didn't look back this time. I couldn't. When I reached the bend in the trail, I glanced toward the signpost and immediately stumbled. The man was peeking from behind it, half hidden, watching me with the stillness of a hunter. My body took over. I broke from the trail, cutting through an overgrown path toward Mark's cabin. Branches whipped my face, mud sucked at my shoes, and the storm roared in my ears. Behind me, the footsteps broke into a run. I didn't dare look. When the cabin came into view through the trees, I bolted toward the back gate and squeezed through just in time, slamming it shut. The hinges screeched. My hands shook as I locked it. On the other side, the figure stood just beyond the wooden slats, fingers curling around them, long fingers, wet skin, no sound except his breathing. "Go away," I shouted, voice cracking. "I'm calling the police." He stood there for one long, unbearable minute. Then he clicked his head to the side again. almost curious, and stepped backward into the forest. I stayed frozen until my legs gave out. Inside the cabin, I locked every door, every window. I kept the lights on. I called Mark, who didn't pick up, and then the local sheriff's non-emergency number, who promised to send someone to check it out. When they arrived, there was no one on the trail, no footprints they could identify, no sign of a struggle. The officer told me it was probably a trespasser or a drunk hiker who got lost in the storm. But later that night, another flash of lightning illuminated the side window near the kitchen. And that was when I saw them muddy footprints leading from the back gate to the window. Large, heavy, fresh. They hadn't been there earlier. He had come back. I slept with a knife in my hand, even though the idea of using it made my stomach turn. I wasn't afraid of dying, not really. I was afraid of being hunted again. That feeling had been dormant for months, but now it was awake, pacing, restless. The next morning, Mark stopped by to check on me. "You look like hell," he said. "Someone followed me last night. Tall guy, quiet. He watched me all the way home." Mark's expression changed. He moved closer to the window, lowering his voice. "You're not the first to say that." "What?" "People around here have been seeing a guy in the woods at night, tall, doesn't talk, shows up on trails, near houses, even by the old docks. Police haven't caught him. Every time they search, he's gone." A chill moved through me so cold it felt like hunger. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to scare you," he admitted. "You came here to heal." I stared out at the tree line, the rain dripping from every branch, turning the world into a blurry watercolor of gray and black. "He was hunting me," I said quietly. Mark didn't argue. For days after, I kept expecting the man to return. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle outside, every change in the wind hit me like a warning. I stopped walking at night. I barely walked during the day. The woods didn't feel like nature anymore. They felt like the mouth of something waiting to swallow me. My therapist once told me the brain remembers patterns more than moments. Trauma imprints more deeply when it repeats. I didn't want to believe I was someone who attracted danger, but maybe it wasn't about attraction. Maybe it was about awareness. Maybe I had spent so long learning how to see the world through a predator's eyes that I could sense when I was being watched even by a human. The man in the woods was never caught. I left Stillwater 3 weeks later, unable to stay another night. Sometimes, when I'm lying awake at 3 in the morning, I think about the way he tilted his head, the way he hid behind the signpost like a kid playing a twisted version of hide and seek, the way he didn't speak, didn't run until I did. Predators don't always have claws. Sometimes they have patience, and sometimes the second time you're hunted is worse than the first because this time, you know exactly what it means. Threats don't always roar before they strike. Trust your instincts, even when others tell you it's only fear talking. Caution can save your life, and listening to your own warning signs is not weakness, it's survival. People always assume fear is something you grow out of, like bad dreams or the dark. I learned early that fear doesn't age out. It waits. When I was 12, my family camped in a foggy stretch of woods near Augusta. One night, I wandered too far looking for the bathroom and got lost. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the beam of my father's lantern when he went searching. When I finally found my way back to the tent, I heard footsteps circling slowly outside. They weren't animal steps. They dragged. They paused when I held my breath. They stayed until dawn. Even now, at 22, that memory sits just beneath my skin. It shows up in the quiet moments, closing shifts at Pine Street Books, long walks home through dimly lit neighborhoods. My brother Nate says I worry too much, but he doesn't know what it's like to feel watched by something you can't name. He's been struggling enough after losing his job. I never want to add my problems to his. On that November night, Portland felt unusually empty. Fog drifted in from the harbor, covering the sidewalks like a slow-moving tide. I locked the bookstore door, adjusted the tote bag digging into my shoulder, and started the walk home. The cold stung my ears. Normally, there were at least a couple people out, students, bar regulars, dog walkers, but that night the streets looked abandoned. A block later, I heard it, a metallic clack behind me. I ignored it. Another block, another clack. Same rhythm as my steps. I turned around, squinting into the fog, and made out a figure tall, wearing an oversized coat, limping slightly. One of his boots flapped with every step. I crossed the street. He crossed too. My heart kicked hard. I tried to steady my voice. "Do you need something?" I called. He didn't answer. He stopped, bent down like he was tying his shoe, but his hands hovered inches above the laces. He was staring at me under his hair. I pulled out my phone to text Nate, but the signal bar read SOS only. A transformer fire earlier in the week had knocked out coverage along this block. Just my luck. I tucked the phone away and kept walking. Faster now. The clacking behind me sped up. My breath clouded the air as I turned the corner, passing shuttered shops and the outline of a playground. The fog thickened, swallowing the crosswalk ahead. I listened, hoping the noises were just echoing off the buildings, but then his voice, low, raspy, cut through the mist. "Lila, you walk home alone too often." My stomach dropped. I had never seen this man before. There was no reason he should know my name. I ran. I sprinted toward the nearest light. I could see the gas station at the next intersection. The doors slid open and I stumbled inside, clutching the counter. The teenage cashier stared at me like I'd burst in on fire. "Someone's following me," I gasped. "Please, don't let him in." We both looked through the window. The sidewalk was empty. No limping figure, no coat. But near the bottom of the glass was a smear of dirty water and a partial print of a broken boot sole. The police came, took my statement, searched the surrounding blocks. They found only a scrap of blue fabric on a fence and a faint trail of disturbed leaves leading nowhere. One officer mentioned another woman had described a man with a limp 2 weeks ago, someone who knew her name even though she'd never met him. I went home shaken. Nate hugged me hard, apologizing for not picking me up, but as I stepped inside, something chilled my spine. Muddy marks on the doormat shaped like the same flapping boot print. Nate swore he hadn't gone out. I believed him. That night, I barely slept. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Saw your lights turn off. You run faster than you used to." I dropped the phone. That old fear from the campsite surged back, heavy and cold. Something had followed me again, something that remembered me. For the next few days, I stuck to crowded areas and didn't walk anywhere alone. But life doesn't stop because you're scared. I still had shifts, bills, responsibilities, and Nate was still fighting to keep himself together. I didn't want to rely on him more than I already did. Thursday night, the fog rolled in early. At work, I told my coworker Erin a toned-down version of what happened. Her eyes got wide. "That's seriously messed up," she said. "You need someone picking you up at night." "I know. Nate's trying. It's been hard for him. He'd want you safe." She wasn't wrong. After closing, she walked me to the bus stop. The street lights flickered, and the fog thinned the world to a few feet around us. The bus never came. She offered me another ride, but her kids were home waiting and I didn't want to keep her. "I'll be okay," I said, though I wasn't convinced. She squeezed my arm before jogging off. I watched her taillights disappear, then started walking. The fog pressed close, swallowing sound. It felt like walking inside a dream where every shadow held its breath. Halfway home, the noise returned. Clack, drag, clack. My throat tightened. I didn't turn around this time. I walked faster, my pulse thudding in my ears. The steps followed. I cut across a small park, hoping to lose him where the paths branched. The fog swirled around the trees. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The steps behind me grew louder. "Leave me alone," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to him or to the old memory inside me. Then his voice again. "Lila." Hearing my name in that tone, the same rasp I remembered from the woods years ago, broke something inside me. I ran. Branches clawed at my sleeves. My breath tore in my chest as I sprinted toward a row of houses. One porch had lights on. I ran up the steps and pounded on the door. "Please, someone's following me." A woman inside called out. "Who is it?" Before she reached the door, I looked down the steps. The man stood there, motionless, fog drifting around him. His coat looked too big for his thin frame. His boot sole hung loose, revealing worn layers underneath. His face, now visible under the porch light, looked weathered, cracked, almost stone-like. "You were small when I first saw you," he rasped, "by the tent." My blood went cold. "No," I whispered. "You're not real." His head tilted. Some things remember the ones who wander. The woman's locks clicked open. I turned toward her voice, and when I looked back, He was gone. Not walking away. Gone. Like the fog had swallowed him whole. The woman let me inside. I sat shaking on her couch until the police arrived again. They searched again. Found nothing again. One officer said softly, "Maybe you should stay with someone tonight." I nodded. They drove me home. Nate was pacing, frantic. "What happened?" he asked. I saw him again. His face paled. "Lila, if we need to move, we'll move." But moving wouldn't change the fact that something had been following me long before I ever lived here. The following weeks blurred together. Nate insisted on driving me to work. I slept with every light on. I tried to convince myself the danger had passed, that maybe the man had gotten bored or moved on. But fear doesn't care about reason. Every so often, late at night, I heard faint sounds outside, dragging steps, a soft clack. I tried telling myself it was ice sliding off a roof or branches tapping, but the rhythm was too familiar. Nate didn't hear it, or maybe he didn't want to say he did. One morning, I went to open the blinds and saw a partial impression in the snow, dragged, uneven, like someone with a damaged boot had walked near our building. I didn't mention it to Nate. He already had enough on his mind. I kept going to work, pretending things were normal. Erin kept asking if I was okay. I kept lying that I was. One night she drove me home again and told me gently, "You can't keep living like you're being hunted." "I know," I said, though the truth was I wasn't sure I wasn't being hunted. When she dropped me off, the fog was thick again. My street looked strangely quiet. I jogged to the door, got inside, and locked it behind me. I was hanging my coat when my phone buzzed. "You don't wander as far anymore." My stomach dropped. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Nate stepped into the hallway. "What's wrong?" Before I could answer, a sound came from outside the window. Clack, drag, clack. Nate's eyes widened. "You hear that?" I nodded. For once, he heard it too. We stood frozen, listening until the steps faded into the mist. Nate put a hand on my shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll figure this out." I promise. I promise. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some things don't stop following just because you shine a light on them. Some things wait, and they remember. I've never handled nights well, not since the accident on the ridge. People call it trauma. I call it a shadow that learned my name and never stopped following me. I was 17 when Noah disappeared in the fog. 1 second he was behind me, swearing at the broken zipper on his backpack, and the next he stepped into a white wall of nothing and was gone. No prints, no trail, just silence thick enough to smother breath. For years I tried to convince myself nature swallowed him, but nature has never made me watch the way I felt tonight. It started the moment I closed the grocery store at 12:48 a.m. I had stayed late covering someone's shift, and my truck had died that morning, leaving me no choice but to walk home through the dark stretch of Gravel Ridge Road. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I'd done the walk before, but something in the air felt wrong the moment I stepped out, heavy, charged, like the kind of pressure that builds before lightning hits. The rain came down in cold, slanting sheets. My flashlight cut a thin path ahead of me through the woods. I tried distracting myself with music, but one earbud crackled with static that sounded too close to whispering. I ripped it out. Halfway home, something buzzed in my jacket. My phone was dead, so I dug out the object vibrating, my old compass. It shouldn't have any reason to move. It didn't even have batteries. Yet the needle jerked and spun like it was trying to drill through the glass. Then it stopped, pointing behind me. I turned slowly. At first I only saw rain, road, and trees. Then I saw him. A tall man in a poncho stood under a broken street lamp 30 yards back, head lowered as if studying the ground. He looked like he had grown out of the shadows, not walked into them. "Sir?" My voice cracked. "You okay?" He didn't answer. He lifted his head slowly, too slowly, and raised his arm until he pointed directly at me. No wavering, just that single, deliberate gesture. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I forced myself to walk, breathing through the panic. When I finally looked back again, he was gone. No footsteps, no movement in the trees, nothing. But I no longer felt alone. As I moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder. Branches snapped beyond the tree line, soft but intentional. Every glance I stole into the forest made me think I saw the shape of that poncho between the trunks, but whenever I focused, it vanished. By the time I reached the old wooden bridge, the halfway mark to my cabin, I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I stepped onto the bridge and froze. The man stood at the far end, upright, unmoving, rain streaming off his poncho in sheets. But this time, he wasn't empty-handed. A torn backpack sat on the railing beside him. Noah's backpack. The faded patches, the frayed straps, the broken zipper I had stared at 1,000 times during the search. My voice came out raw. "Where did you get that?" He didn't speak. He placed a hand on the backpack and pushed it off the railing. It fell into the black water below with a splash, swallowed instantly by the storm. My compass jerked so violently I dropped it. The man started moving. Not walking. Gliding. A grim slide forward, his poncho snapping like something alive. I sprinted off the bridge into the woods even though I knew it was a mistake. Mud sucked at my boots, branches clawed at my face. Something heavy splashed behind me, too heavy for one person. When I reached the old logging trail, I made the mistake of looking up. The man was perched in a leaning pine above the trail, limbs bent backward like broken joints. His head turned toward me with a slow, wet crack that I felt more than heard. I ran so fast my legs nearly gave out. Somehow I made it to my cabin, slammed the door, locked everything I could, and backed away. Water dripped down the window latch fresh. Something had touched it moments earlier. I didn't sleep. I called the police when dawn came. They searched the road, the bridge, the woods, and found nothing. But they did find a backpack downstream, torn open, ripped in ways no animal or human could have made. I didn't go back to the ridge that day. I didn't go outside at all. I carried the compass around the cabin like a shield. At noon, I found it sitting on my windowsill even though I had left it on the kitchen table. The needle pointed not north, but inward, toward me. That night at the store, I saw him again. He stood outside under the awning, face hidden in the rain, pointing at me through the glass. When I blinked, he vanished. My coworker saw nothing. By midnight, I couldn't take the tension twisting through my chest. I closed early and waited for a tow, planning to get my truck fixed and never walk this road again. When the driver finally dropped me at my cabin, something lay on the porch near the welcome mat. A compass. Not mine. Noah's. The one the search team never recovered. I picked it up with shaking hands. The needle spun wildly before snapping toward the tree line. I lifted my head. The man stood among the pines. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. He lifted his arm again, pointing not at me, but at the ground. Footprints. Fresh ones in the mud leading up to my front door. Not human prints. Long, narrow, clawed impressions that ended inches from my doormat. When I looked back toward the trees, he was gone. But I wasn't alone. That was the moment I grabbed a bag and drove. I didn't care where. I needed distance. But 10 minutes down the road, my truck sputtered and died even though the mechanic had said it was fine earlier that week. The rain eased for a moment, just enough for silence to settle. Then the woods began to breathe. I stepped out with a flashlight. Fog rolled across the pavement in thin sheets. Something thumped behind me. When I turned, a poncho hung from a branch like shed skin. Above it, something shifted. It crawled down the tree backward, limbs folding and unfolding like broken wings. When it stood, I saw its face, or the lack of one, smooth, pale, almost reflective, like wet stone. My flashlight flickered. The compass in my pocket shook violently. Then a voice whispered inside my head, layered and broken, but unmistakable. "Liam." Noah's voice. My stomach dropped. "No," I said. "You're not him." The thing tilted its head. Another voice echoed beneath it, deeper, older. "Come back." I stumbled into my truck, shaking so hard I could barely hold the keys. The engine roared to life like something startled. I drove without thinking, gripping the wheel until my hands went numb. In the rearview mirror, the creature stepped onto the road, limbs stretching like it was unfolding into something larger. The farther I drove, the less clear its shape became until the rain swallowed everything behind me. I didn't return to the cabin, didn't return to Cedar Brook. I packed what I could from town in daylight, ignoring the woods pressing silent and heavy around me, and left Oregon entirely. A new apartment, New town, new life. But fear doesn't obey geography. Because even now, on nights when the rain is heavy enough to drown the world, I hear tapping on my window slow, rhythmic, like metal nudging glass. And when I check Noah's compass, the needle sometimes trembles, as if it remembers the woods better than I do. Running from trauma doesn't erase it, it only gives it more places to hide. Healing begins when we stop letting fear choose our direction, before it turns us into someone we no longer recognize. Most people assume librarians live peaceful lives, tucked safely behind bookshelves and desk lamps, far from real fear. But fear has a way of following you, even through the quietest stacks. Mine goes back to when I was 15 and made the worst decision of my life, pulling over on a warm June afternoon to offer a hitchhiker a ride. I thought I was being kind, responsible, the type of person my parents raised me to be. Instead, I ended up with a man who memorized my bus route, showed up at the grocery store when I was alone, and eventually climbed over our backyard fence at 2 a.m. before the police arrested him. Even now, 12 years later, I can still hear the crunch of leaves under his boots. I'm 27 now, working at Winter Ridge Public Library in Maine, and I've learned precautions the way other people learn hobbies. I take longer routes, stick to lit streets, text my location to friends whenever I walk alone, but late shifts and broken cars don't care about your trauma. That night, the library was empty except for a few leftover craft materials from the winter reading event. I shut everything down, grabbed my coat, and stepped out to the parking lot where the snow fell in soft, steady sheets. I tried my car once, twice, 3 times. The engine coughed and died, leaving me with a useless heap of metal and a phone at 2% battery. I didn't even get a chance to call for help before it shut off completely. So I started walking. Old Pine Route was quiet, too quiet. Streetlights glowed blurry halos through the falling snow. I wrapped my scarf around my mouth and kept my head down, listening only to my boots crunching over fresh powder. I told myself it was a normal winter night, not a flashback waiting to happen. Then I saw her. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, wearing a bright yellow coat. She stood at the bend where the trees pressed close to the road. No adult with her, no car, no movement. Just standing with her arms hanging at her sides. Her face tilted down like she was listening for something underground. "Do you need help?" I asked, raising my voice. Nothing. Not a flinch. I took a few hesitant steps forward. The girl lifted her head, revealing only the faint shape of her chin under the hood, then turned and began walking in the same direction I was going, staying about 30 yards ahead. I slowed. She slowed. I sped up. She sped up. A coldness tightened in my throat. I'd lived this pattern before, years ago. The shadow that always seemed 30 yards behind me. Now it was 30 yards in front. I crossed to the other side of the road. The girl shifted too. Same distance, same pace. "Please stop," I called out. She didn't stop, but her head tilted slightly, almost curious. I turned sharply onto a side road, hoping to lose her, my boots skidding on a patch of ice. The snow seemed louder here, swallowing every sound except my heartbeat. I walked quickly, refusing to look back until I had to. When I finally turned, I expected to see her following my tracks. Instead, she stood at the mouth of the street, as if she had always been there, no footprints behind her, just the fresh ones leading straight toward me. My breath caught. Something in me cracked open. I ran. The snowstorm thickened until the world shrank to a tunnel of white. My breath puffed in frantic bursts as I sprinted through the quiet neighborhood, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Each time, the road was empty, and each time, it felt wrong that it was. Pinecrest Lodge appeared through the haze, a rundown motel that had been closed for years after a fire inspector declared it unsafe. Kids used it as a dare spot back in high school. I had only ever driven past it. Now was the only shelter in sight. I slipped through a broken service door, the hinges whining as if they hadn't moved in ages. Inside, the lobby was dark and cold enough for my breath to cloud the air. Wallpaper curled away from the walls in strips, and old reception keys hung crooked on rusted hooks behind the counter. I crouched behind the counter, heart hammering so loud it felt like the girl could hear it through the walls. Outside, the wind howled, pushing flakes against broken windows. Then came the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, rhythmic, knuckles on glass. My stomach dropped. I rose just enough to peek over the counter. She stood inches from the lobby's glass door, the yellow hood dripping melting snow. Her head was bowed, face hidden, and each breath fogged the glass. "Please go," I whispered, though she couldn't hear me. Or maybe she could. After a moment, her hand lifted and tapped again 3 slow knocks. I ducked back down, clamping a hand over my mouth. Seconds passed, then a minute, then silence. I crawled toward the hallway, moving as quietly as I could. The corridor stretched ahead in a line of sagging ceiling tiles and broken doors. I slipped into the shadows, hoping the darkness would hide me. A faint creak echoed through the lobby. The front door, opening. Snow dragged across the carpet as someone or something stepped inside. Footsteps followed, small, uneven, getting closer. I slipped into a room halfway down the hall, pressing myself behind a dusty wardrobe. My pulse roared in my ears. The footsteps entered the room next to mine, a soft thump, a scrape, then nothing. Minutes crawled by. The silence grew unbearable. Finally, I crept out. Across the hall, the door where I'd heard the noises hung open. On the floor sat a pair of small yellow boots, clean, untouched by snow, placed neatly side by side. But there were no footprints leading out. Only one set of footprints in the room. Mine. I bolted. I ran until the motel faded behind me, and the storm swallowed its shape. Old pine root reappeared through the swirling snow like a lifeline. I shouted for help even though the wind carried the sound away before it left my throat. Then I saw headlights. A plow truck rumbled closer, pushing a thick wave of snow to the side. I waved frantically until it slowed. "You okay?" the driver shouted. I nodded despite shaking from head to toe. "Get in," he said. The warmth inside the cab hit me like a shock. I kept looking out the window, expecting a flash of yellow. "What were you doing out here?" he asked. "My car died," I said, "and a girl was following me." His face tightened. "A girl?" "She had a yellow coat," I said, "small, alone." His hands tightened on the wheel. "This road. It's not safe in storms, especially since what happened a few winters back." "What happened?" "A girl went missing near the ridge. Only thing they ever found was her coat stuck in a tree, bright yellow. Never found her footprints, never found her." I stared at him, numb. "How old was she?" "About 10, he said. "Vanished Christmas week." My voice failed me. I stared out at the empty snow-covered road, feeling the shape of something watching from the storm's edge. When he dropped me off at my house, he waited until I locked the door before driving away. I collapsed on the floor inside, the warmth doing nothing to stop the shaking. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. 3 days passed in a blur. My thoughts tangled together, fear, exhaustion, disbelief, while I tried desperately to pretend life was normal. I kept telling myself the girl wasn't real, that exhaustion had twisted shadows into threats, but every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. On the 4th day, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in Winter Ridge anymore. I had spent too many years believing the town was my safe place, but now every snowy street felt like a memory waiting to repeat itself. I quit my job, packed my belongings, and made plans to move to Denver, where a college friend had space for me. The idea of bright streets, constant noise, and crowds sounded like a relief. Fear couldn't follow you as easily when you were surrounded by thousands of strangers. My last night in Winter Ridge was still as a photograph. Streetlights glowed against a light dusting of snow. I sat by the window, sipping tea, trying to tell myself I'd imagined everything. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye. A small figure stood across the street, perfectly still, snow drifting around her. A yellow coat. The cup slipped from my hands and hit the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stepped back instinctively, but forced myself to look again. She didn't move, didn't even shift her weight, just stared in my direction as if she had been waiting for me to come to the window. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely dial. This time, I didn't run. I called the police. 2 officers arrived quickly. They searched the street, checked the yards, swept their flashlights across every driveway. "She's gone," I said. "She was right there. No footprints," one officer told me gently. "None at all. She was right there," I repeated, voice cracking. They didn't argue, but their eyes gave away what they were thinking. After they left, I locked every door, every window. The house creaked, but I stayed awake until sunrise. When I stepped outside to load the moving truck, something stopped me cold. Tiny footprints in the snow on my porch, just two, leading nowhere. And caught on the railing, a single yellow thread. Denver was supposed to be a new start, and in many ways, it was. I found a job at a busy library, where people constantly came and went. I walked home, through well-lit streets. I stopped looping around the block to check shadows. Sometimes I even forgot the heavy feeling in my chest. But winter has a way of reminding you of things. The first snowfall in Denver came in December. Thick flakes drifting lazily through street lamps. I watched from my apartment window, hot chocolate in hand, telling myself this year would be different. Then something flickered at the corner of my vision. Yellow. Just a hint of it. Near the alley across the street. I blinked hard. It was gone. But the old coldness returned, sliding up my spine like a memory that wasn't finished with me. Since then, it's happened a handful of times on late nights, walking home, on quiet mornings when the snow covers everything, on bus rides where reflections trick the eye. Always the same. A flash of yellow. Never close enough to see clearly. Never far enough to dismiss. And sometimes, when the snow is deep and untouched, I turn around and see faint footprints behind me. Small ones. As if something found me years ago and never really left. I've spent most of my life pretending a single moment from childhood never happened. I was 8 years old, half asleep in my room, when I glanced at the mirror on the back of my door. My reflection should have been doing exactly what I did, blinking, breathing, yawning. Instead, it smiled before I did, slow, wrong, like someone wearing my face and waiting for me to notice. My parents brushed it off. Kids imagine things when they're tired. Mirrors don't have minds of their own. I forced myself to believe them, but the memory stayed inside me like a splinter under the skin, small, buried, but impossible to forget. By 2021, the mirror incident felt like a distant nightmare. I lived in Edinburgh, working as an archivist in the Royal Museum Restoration Lab. It was the kind of job that made sense to me. Old things, fixed and catalogued, each with a documented history. Predictable, unlike the rest of my life. My marriage had just collapsed. The panic disorder diagnosis followed not long after. I had coworkers who cared, but I didn't know how to let them close. Work became the place where I hid from everything else. One October day, a cracked Victorian hand mirror arrived for restoration. Its frame twisted with looping patterns, the kind of antique detail that should have been charming but instead sent a faint shiver through me. I assumed it was stress. I spent hours repairing the crack, polishing the frame, cataloging its condition. It was normal work, and I found comfort in normal work. I stayed late that night. The museum emptied out, leaving only the quiet hum of the building and the soft scrape of my tools. When I finally stepped outside around 10, the fog was thick enough to blur the street lamps. My bus route was shut down for construction, so I walked home about 25 minutes through narrow alleys. My phone battery was one stumble from dying. The city felt unusually silent for a student area. I tried to blame the fog, the late hour, the exhaustion. But as I walked past a bookstore window, I caught a flicker of movement. I turned automatically. My reflection stood as expected, but its head was turned slightly, as if it were looking over my shoulder instead of at me. A cold pinch gripped my stomach. I checked behind me. Just fog. When I looked back, the reflection was normal again. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a misinterpretation, stress. Everything becomes stress when you're stretched thin enough. But the reflections kept doing things I didn't do. In the glass door of a cafe, it blinked a beat too late. At a bus stop panel, it lifted its hand after mine. In an apartment lobby window, its mouth formed a word I couldn't hear. My pace quickened. My heartbeat pounded loud enough to drown out the world. I tried calling my best friend, but my phone died mid-ring. The fog thickened, swallowing sound until even my footsteps felt muffled. I turned down a familiar stretch of Candlemaker Row, trying to stay calm. That was when I passed an old antique shop with a tall, dusty window. Something instinct, dread, the kind of fear you feel in your bones made me glance toward it. I froze. My reflection wasn't alone. A little girl stood beside the reflected version of me, pale, still, wearing a collared dress that looked decades out of place. She lifted her hand and tapped the glass from the inside. The actual street behind me was completely empty. My pulse stopped for a long moment. I opened my mouth to speak, to yell, to run. Anything but a whisper touched my ear first. "You brought her back." The voice was so close I felt the cold breath against my skin. I spun around, breath sharp, but no one was there. When I looked back at the window, the girl was closer, her face nearly pressed to the glass. She had my childhood eyes. That broke me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping, and ran. The fog thickened into a white wall around me. At the end of the alley, another shop window caught my eye. My reflection stood perfectly still inside it, watching me as I ran, and it was holding the Victorian mirror I had restored earlier. The girl appeared beside it again, her hand pressed against the surface of the mirror, her expression empty. The reflection's lips moved. "Let her out." I bolted all the way home, slammed the door shut, and slid to the floor in shaking sobs. Every part of me wanted to believe it was a panic attack, a hallucination. I'd had bad ones before. Trauma can warp reality. My therapist always said stress makes the brain misfire. I repeated that until I fell asleep. The next morning, I walked into the museum determined to get back to routine. But routine didn't greet me. My curator, Liam, was waiting by my workstation with the Victorian mirror in his hands, his expression pinched with confusion. "Did you leave this outside?" he asked. I stared at it, numb. "Outside, where?" "Front steps. Someone left it wrapped in cloth." He paused. "It looks cleaned." It did. The frame gleamed, polished flawlessly. The crack was gone entirely. On the back, scratched into the tarnish with something sharp, were 3 words. "You looked away." My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I forced composure for Liam's sake. "Probably some kind of prank," I managed. He didn't look convinced, but he walked off. When I angled the mirror toward me, faint and distant, I saw her, the girl, standing behind my reflection, blurred like a memory sinking underwater. For days, I tried ignoring the mirror. I kept it wrapped in a towel, shoved into a drawer. But every time the room got quiet, I felt watched, not from the door or the window, but from where the mirror lay hidden. Avoiding it made things worse. One night, after everyone had gone home, I closed the lab door and unwrapped the mirror. I was shaking so badly I had to grip the table to steady myself. "Okay," I whispered. "Just breathe." My reflection appeared normally. For a moment, I almost convinced myself nothing would happen. Then the room behind my reflection grew darker. The girl stepped into view, standing close enough that I could see the shape of her hands, the faint outline of her dress. I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" She mouthed a single word. "Me." A childhood memory rushed back with startling clarity: the storm outside, the flickering streetlights, the moment my reflection smiled early, and the pounding on the mirror after I'd slammed the door shut. I had forgotten the pounding, forgotten the way it sounded like a child begging to be acknowledged. The girl placed her hand against the inside of the mirror, the surface smudged under the pressure. A crack formed across the glass, branching out like something pushing from within. I ran. I didn't look back. At home, I sat with every light on, bracing for the sound of tapping on my windows. It never came, but the fear stayed raw under my skin. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. There was only one place where all this began: my childhood home. The house now belonged to a family friend, but he let me in without question. My old bedroom felt smaller than I remembered, but the outline where my childhood mirror once hung was still visible on the back of the door. I set the Victorian mirror on the dresser. The air felt heavy, charged, like a storm was building inside the walls. I took a steadying breath. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm looking now." My reflection surfaced slowly. The girl appeared beside me again, not ghostly this time, but painfully human. She pointed to the wall behind her. A faint outline of a door glowed like chalk, a door I had closed on her 25 years ago. The girl wasn't a spirit. She wasn't someone else's child. She was the part of me that froze in terror that night, the part that learned fear instead of understanding, isolation instead of comfort. "You don't want out," I whispered. "You want to be seen." Tears shone in her eyes as she nodded. I pressed my hand to the mirror. She mirrored the gesture, her palm warm against mine through the cold surface. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I shouldn't have looked away. Her expression softened into something small and relieved. The cracks faded, the shadows dissolved, and she stepped back into the depth of the mirror until she vanished entirely. My reflection looked normal again. When I returned the mirror to the museum the next day, it sat on the table like any other artifact, silent, harmless, nothing more than silvered glass framed in old metal. But I wasn't the same. Sometimes, late at night, I pass a window and catch my reflection looking steadier, softer, like a person who finally stopped running from the kid she used to be. And maybe that's what healing really is. You cannot heal from what you refuse to face. The parts of yourself you bury don't disappear, they wait for you to acknowledge them. Courage begins the moment you turn toward what frightens you instead of away from it. Before the night, everything changed. Walking home alone was something I never thought twice about. I was 17, old enough to feel invincible, young enough to believe fear was something people grew out of. I'd worked the evening shift at a grocery store all year, and the route home down Willow Street, past a row of quiet houses, then through the shortcut behind St. Matthew's Church was practically muscle memory. I'd walked it in rain, wind, summer heat, even once during a blackout. Nothing ever happened. That night, though, the sky looked wrong. Heavy dark clouds pressed so low they hid the moon. Wind cut through my jacket, and thunder rolled somewhere past the tree line. I checked my phone. 6:48 p.m. Not late, but late enough that the streetlights flickered on. At the entrance of the shortcut path, the old lamp swung wildly, buzzing like it was fighting to stay alive. The path beyond it was completely dark. I usually didn't mind the narrow fences or the cramped walkway, but the darkness made it look like a tunnel leading nowhere. I hesitated. The longer way home meant walking against the wind. My phone battery was nearly dead. Storm warnings buzzed through town all evening. The faster route felt safer, even if that didn't make much sense. A loud crack of thunder made my decision for me. I pulled my hood tight and stepped into the path. The change hit immediately. The wind stopped, completely. The air grew so still it felt like someone pressed their hands over my ears. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, swallowed by the tall fences on either side. I walked faster. Halfway through, I heard another set of footsteps behind me. Not an echo, not leaves. Footsteps, slower than mine, uneven, one dragging. I kept going, my pulse quickening. The path wasn't long, less than a minute from end to end, but that minute stretched like it was pulling itself apart. When the footsteps sped up to match mine, I knew it wasn't my imagination. Then a voice whispered behind me, "Ivan." My name. Close enough that I felt breath on the back of my neck. That ripped away any last bit of calm I had. I bolted. I sprinted through the last stretch of darkness until I burst onto Willow Street, gasping for air. Streetlights glowed in soft halos through the thick air. Cars were parked quietly along the curb. Everything looked normal again, except the footsteps followed, the same dragging rhythm. I didn't turn back. My house appeared at the end of the block, dark except for a faint night light in the hall window. My parents were working an overnight shift. They had told me earlier they might not be home until morning. I stumbled up the driveway, fumbled my keys, hands shaking hard enough to rattle the doorknob. The footsteps stopped behind me at the edge of the concrete. Still, I didn't look. I shoved my way inside, slammed the door shut, threw the deadbolt, and didn't move for a solid 15 seconds, just listened, waiting. Nothing. Finally, I let myself breathe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me farther than just the shortcut. The house was freezing. My breath came out in faint wisps. The thermostat was dead. Power must have flickered with the storm. I grabbed 2 old blankets from the hall closet and wrapped them around myself as I walked into the living room. I turned on the TV, hoping for noise, but the signal kept cutting out. I tried to settle on the couch. I told myself the footsteps were someone else walking home. Maybe someone said a name that just sounded like mine. Maybe fear twisted sound in my ears. I'd never been this shaken before. I didn't want to believe I'd been followed. But the house didn't feel right. Every few minutes, a long, low groan came from the walls, old wood shifting under changing temperatures. Or at least, that's the explanation I clung to. I drifted in and out of light sleep. Around 11:20 p.m., a tapping sound yanked me awake. Tap, Tap, tap. Sharp, rhythmic, coming from the backyard sliding door. My chest tightened. I sat up slowly, blanket sliding off my shoulders. The tapping grew louder, more urgent. I forced myself to turn toward the glass. A tall shadow stood just beyond it. Lightning flashed behind the figure, revealing only an outline lean, slightly bent, unmoving, except for what looked like a slow tilt of the head. The tap came again, a fingertip on glass. I nearly stopped breathing. Something deep in me, instinct or fear, told me not to scream, not to move too fast. I slid off the couch and crawled toward the dining table, staying low. The tablecloth brushed the top of my head as I squeezed under it, pulling my knees tight against my chest. Then the realization hit me like ice water. I had forgotten to close the kitchen blinds. They were wide open. The shadow could see straight inside. The tapping stopped. Silence filled the house, thick and heavy. I held perfectly still. Then, footsteps. Inside. Slow, uneven, one dragging. My stomach dropped. I squeezed my mouth shut to keep the sound of my breath small. Through a thin gap at the bottom of the tablecloth, I saw legs shuffle past torn pants, skin streaked with mud, one foot twisted sharply outward. A metal clatter hit the floor. Something rolled, scraping the wood. A crowbar, rusty. The figure stood still, listening. I didn't dare blink. Minutes passed felt like hours until the figure limped toward the front door. The lock clicked softly. A rush of cold air blew into the house, then the door closed again. Silence. I stayed hidden until my legs went numb. When I finally crawled out, I picked up the crowbar, terrified to leave it where my parents might find it and ask questions I couldn't answer. I shoved it under the stairs. By dawn, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. A vivid, storm-fueled hallucination. When my parents came home, I acted fine. But inside, nothing felt normal anymore. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept checking behind me on the walk to school. Every sudden noise made me jump. I barely slept. But there was no more tapping, no footsteps, no voice. I tried to convince myself everything that happened was panic and shadows layered on exhaustion. Yet the crowbar under the stairs weighed on my thoughts like proof I didn't want to admit existed. Friday night, my shift at the grocery store ran late. By the time I walked home, the wind had picked up again. I hugged my jacket tight and stuck to the long main road. No shortcuts, ever again. Halfway home, the street light ahead flickered and went out. I felt it before I heard it, a presence at my back. Then, shuffle, drag. My pulse shot up. I walked faster. The footsteps quickened too. I turned onto my street without looking behind me. When my house came into view, I sprinted the final stretch, burst inside, and locked the door. The footsteps stopped outside. I didn't look through the window. I couldn't. That night, I found mud smeared beneath my bedroom window, thin streaks, as if someone had braced a hand there while looking inside. I didn't tell my parents, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew they wouldn't believe it. Not fully. Not enough to explain the truth. Something had followed me home, and it wasn't stopping. The next night, my parents had the evening off. For the first time all week, the house felt alive, lights on, the smell of popcorn from the kitchen, the low hum of a movie from the living room. Normal. I sat on the stairs, scrolling my phone, trying to ignore how tightly wound I'd become. My mom eventually told me to go to bed, insisting I needed rest. I went to my room, turned on my lamp, and sat on the edge of my bed. For a while, nothing happened. I even started to believe maybe the worst was over. Then, tap. At my window. Quiet. Deliberate. I stared at the blinds, frozen. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might give me away. A second tap came, then a third. The tapping stopped. Silence. I approached the blinds, hand trembling over the cord, unsure whether knowing was worse than not knowing. Before I could move them, a whisper slid through the glass. Yvonne. I stumbled backward, knocking my lamp to the floor. The bulb shattered, leaving me in pitch darkness. Panic shot through me. I bolted out of my room, ran downstairs, breath caught in my throat. My parents turned, startled. "What happened?" my dad asked. Before I could speak, a scraping sound dragged along the side of the house. Slow, grating metal or bone against wood. My mom's face went pale. My dad grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the front door. I grabbed his arm. "Don't open it," I whispered. "Please." He paused. The scraping stopped. We all stood there, listening, every second stretching long and thin. Finally, my dad peeked through the side window. No one was there, but the muddy streaks along the siding were enough to make him lock all 3 deadbolts. We didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the police came after my dad called them. They walked around the house, asked questions, checked the windows. They found footprints in the mud, long strides, one deep drag mark. They couldn't explain them. "Probably someone passing through," one officer said. "Storms bring out all kinds of weird behavior." He didn't see the way the prints ended abruptly near the backyard fence, like whatever made them just disappeared. After they left, my parents and I checked the house again. When I opened the closet under the stairs, my stomach sank. The crowbar was still there, as rusted, as filthy, as real as the night I hid it. My mom frowned. "Where did that come from?" "I found it outside," I said. She didn't buy it, but she didn't push. My dad tossed the crowbar into the trash bin outside. Even then, I felt a chill, like throwing it away didn't matter, because whatever held it wasn't done with me. The weeks that followed were quiet. No tapping, no footsteps, no whispers. Life went back to something almost normal, but I never felt truly alone, not the safe kind of alone. More like eyes followed me from places I couldn't see. Even years later, living miles away in a different city, I still sleep with a nightlight. Doors locked, windows checked twice. People joke about it. I don't care, because every once in a while, usually past midnight, the world goes silent for a moment too long. And then I hear it. Shuffle. Drag. Somewhere outside my door. And a whisper as soft as breath. "Yvonne." Not angry. Not threatening. Just patient. Like it's still waiting for the moment I forget to be afraid. Long before the night on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, before the cold and the fog and the man who changed everything, I used to believe that if I worked hard enough and cared hard enough, I could keep people alive. Being a paramedic forces that belief into you. You learn to hold yourself together even when the world around you is falling apart. But after my fiancé, Mark, died in a boating accident 2 years earlier, something inside me cracked. I didn't quit my job because it was the only place I still felt useful. Saving strangers was easier than grieving someone I loved. By February 2016, exhaustion had become my baseline. The winter storms turned Bristol into chaos, slips, crashes, overdoses. The night it began, I'd just finished a 14-hour double shift at Street Aldhelm Medical Center. My hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic. My mind replayed the overdose victim I couldn't save. It was almost 1:15 a.m., and the cold air felt sharper than usual. I usually took a taxi home, but that night something in me needed the walk, needed space, needed silence. The Clifton Suspension Bridge had once been part of my routine with Mark, but after he died I avoided it, until that night, when the idea of crossing it suddenly felt necessary. The snowfall was gentle, the fog drifting low over the Avon Gorge. Only my footsteps broke the quiet. The long orange glow of the lamps stretched across the walkway, giving everything a ghostly look. That's when I saw him. A figure leaning over the railing halfway across the bridge. Still, slumped, alone. Too many people had come here with bad intentions, and my paramedic instincts kicked in despite how drained I was. I walked faster. "Hey," I called gently. "You all right?" He jerked upright, startled. He was tall, soaking wet from the snow, wearing only a thin shirt with the sleeves ripped at the elbows. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear, not sadness, not despair, but fear. "Don't look behind me," he whispered. "Please don't." I stopped. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "They followed me," he said, "from the tunnel." "What tunnel?" But he didn't answer. His gaze flicked constantly toward the dark metal framework beneath the bridge. I stepped closer. "Let me call someone." "No," he snapped, grabbing his arm as if to hide something. Blood stained the makeshift bandage around his forearm. "Who did this?" "Not who," he whispered. "What?" Before I could press further, a metallic scraping echoed from beneath the bridge, sharp, slow, unnatural. The man flinched hard. They found me. I looked through the fog and saw movement below. Something shifting across the beams. Too fast to be a person. Too quiet to be any animal I knew. "Don't stare at it," he said. "Just move." He bolted toward the far end of the bridge. I hesitated only a moment before chasing him. We'd barely run 50 feet when he froze again. A hooded figure stood under a lamppost at the end of the walkway, still, facing us. "That's one of them," the man whispered. I turned back, and another figure was behind us, blocking the way we came. My heart jerked into my throat. "Come on," I said, steadying my voice. "Down the stairs. Move." He didn't argue. We sprinted toward the stone steps leading into Ley Woods, slipping on patches of ice. The forest swallowed us quickly, branches brushing our coats, snow muffling our footsteps. For a few moments, I heard nothing but our breathing. Then behind us the steady crunch of footsteps, controlled, methodical, gaining. "Who are they?" I whispered. "They kept me," he said between breaths, "in the old Redford Railway tunnel. Experiments, like I wasn't human." I wanted to dismiss it as trauma-induced paranoia, but the fear in his voice wasn't imagined, it was lived. We broke into a small clearing. He collapsed, clutching his bleeding arm. "You need a hospital," I said, kneeling beside him. I grabbed my phone, no signal. He grabbed my sleeve. "They'll take me again if I stay here." "Who are they?" I asked again. He stared past me, eyes widening in terror. "Laura, they're right behind you." I spun around. Nothing, just snow falling in slow, quiet flakes. But some instinct deeper than logic told me he wasn't hallucinating. We were being circled, studied. He reached into his pocket with shaking fingers and pressed a small metal capsule into my hand. "Destroy it. Don't let them get it. Don't let them get you." Before I could react, he stood and ran deeper into the woods, stumbling but determined. "Wait," I called. "You're hurt." But he didn't stop. Two hooded figures slipped after him through the trees, silent, smooth, almost gliding. No crunch of snow, no sound of breathing. Then they were gone. It took me nearly an hour to find my way back to the lit streets. Police searched the woods but found no blood, no footprints besides mine, no evidence of a chase. They told me exhaustion can distort perception. I didn't argue, but I didn't believe them. Not after what I saw under that bridge. For days afterward, every walk home filled me with tension. I checked every shadow, every reflection, every sound behind me. The capsule stayed in my coat pocket, cold and heavy. I didn't open it at first. I didn't tell anyone about it. Part of me feared that destroying it like he asked would bring those figures straight to my door. But ignoring it didn't make things better. It started with footsteps behind me, soft, even, too steady to be random. Every time I turned, the street was empty. Then Milo, my usually calm terrier, started growling at corners of my apartment, backing away as if someone stood there. One night, a man in a hood appeared at the end of my street, just standing, watching. When I slowed my pace, he turned toward the woods nearby, as if waiting for something, not for me. I barely slept that night. The next morning, someone slid an envelope under my apartment door. No return address, only one sentence inside. "Destroy the capsule." My stomach dropped. I still hadn't opened it. Still hadn't told anyone I even had it. Later that day, my phone rang from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A whisper. "Stop opening it." I jerked upright. Who is this? They monitor anything connected to him. Phones, buildings. What do they want? But the caller hung up. Moments later, Milo bolted to the back door, barking. Something brushed the outside of the glass, soft, deliberate. I approached slowly. A shadow stood in the yard. Tall, unmoving, watching the house. By the time I called the police, the yard was empty. But the fear stayed. That night, unable to sleep, I finally opened the capsule. Inside was a single folded note. "If they find you, keep walking." I didn't know what it meant, but my body understood before my mind did. A warning, a rule. A rule the man clearly hadn't followed. Months passed. The footsteps became familiar, not constant, but frequent. I'd hear them only when I was alone. Walking home after a late shift, crossing a quiet street, unlocking my apartment door, never running, never rushing, just following. I kept telling myself it was stress. Trauma can echo in physical ways. But then things escalated. One night, I woke at 2 a.m. to soft tapping on my bedroom window. Milo whimpered and backed away. My apartment was on the second floor, no one should have been able to reach the window. I approached it cautiously. Nothing disappeared faster than the breath in my lungs. The man from the bridge stood below on the street, pale, soaked from snow, same clothes, same terrified eyes. I rushed downstairs and threw open the door. He was gone. Only a set of footprints leading away and another capsule sitting on the stair. Inside it, "Don't stop walking." I didn't call the police. I didn't call anyone. I didn't sleep. The next morning, a news alert flashed on my phone. Unidentified body found near Redford Railway Tunnel. No clothing. No belongings. A long incision across the forearm. I drove to the tunnel site before the area was closed off. Snow covered most of the ground, but near the entrance I found a torn piece of shirt fabric. The same color he'd worn, scratched into the concrete wall, almost too faint to see. They walked behind you. A chill crawled down my spine. All the pieces clicked into place, not in a logical way, but in a way instinct couldn't deny. He hadn't imagined his pursuers, and now they had shifted their attention to me. Fear eventually becomes routine. It doesn't leave you, just learn to carry it. I stopped going out at night unless I had to. I changed my locks twice, installed more lights, started taking longer, brighter routes home. But even light didn't help. One evening, as I crossed a small parking lot on my way home, I heard footsteps again. Slow. Measured. Following the exact rhythm of mine. I felt someone watching me so intensely, it made my skin prickle. I didn't run. I remembered the man's words. If they find you, keep walking. So I did. I walked to my building, up the stairs, through my door. I didn't look behind me, not once. The next morning, faint prints marked the frost outside my window. Not human, or at least, not shaped like any shoe I knew. Some nights now, I hear faint tapping on my walls. Sometimes a soft scrape across the floor outside my apartment. Lights flicker in hallways where no one is standing. Nothing violent has happened, nothing direct, but I feel watched every time I'm alone. Maybe they follow me because of the capsules. Maybe because I helped him on the bridge. Or maybe, once you've seen them, they don't let you go back to living like they don't exist. People ask why I never moved, why I never left, but something tells me they would follow no matter where I went. They are patient. They are quiet. They walk just close enough to remind me they're there. So I keep moving, keep walking, keep breathing. And every time I feel footsteps behind me, steady as a heartbeat, I remember the last thing the man ever said. Don't let them take you. And I won't. Not as long as I keep walking. Trust your instincts, especially when fear warns you about dangers reason can't explain. Survival often begins with listening to the quiet voice inside you that says, keep moving.